Zach LaVine wants out of Chicago, and the Bulls are in a tough situation to let the star go from the team. I'm your host, Joey Mercer. This is Bulls Digest. And before we get into it today, I just want to say that about 97% of you are not subscribed. So if you're looking for a place for daily Chicago Bulls content, then look no further. This is the place for you. Like I said, 7 days a week, we're doing Bulls content covering everything you need from trade rumors to post games to anything that comes up regarding the players that you need to be kept up to date on. We are going to be covering that here on Bulls Digest. So make sure to go down below, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell for notifications. And you won't even have to search it up anymore. It'll be right there for you as soon as we upload every single day. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The first topic today is LaVine wants out. Yeah, so there's been a lot of speculation talking about Zach LaVine going from the Bulls, leaving the team because they are looking to do a potential rebuild based on their 5-10 start. However, it is a little difficult to move LaVine right now at the moment when the team doesn't really seem to have a direction. They are kind of in this weird in-between where they're not a great team in the league right now, but they should be at least in a play-in spot, if not fighting for the end of a playoff rotation spot of the play-in. It doesn't really make sense right now for them to be as bad as they are and for them to be losing games such as the one they lost the other night to the Orlando Magic when they were missing 3 starters. That just simply isn't acceptable. And then to come back after being down 22-1 in the first quarter and being booed on your home court to beat the Heat, but then lose by 18 to the Heat, which makes sense losing to the Heat. They're such a great team, and Chicago isn't quite as good as them, but at least we split a series, but it was very close to us being blown out in both games, and we shouldn't have to crawl back in games like that. There needs to be more effort, as we spoke in yesterday's video. DeMar was right to call out the players and say that they really need to be putting their best foot forward on the basketball court. So the first thing I saw to speak about this today, of course, was the other night, LaVine was mad at something, had no interest in staying after the game. This was after a win. That was the win I just talked about, them down 22-1 in the first quarter and climbing all the way back to beat the Heat in Chicago, and then LaVine storms off the court. You could see in the picture just a second ago that there was a lady actually trying to get an interview or talk to him, and she puts her hand on his shoulder, and he kind of shrugs her off. So he wanted nothing to do with anything on the court at that time, and just seemed to want to get out of there as quickly as possible. It was as soon as the final buzzer sound, he just basically booted for the door, and that was all we heard from him until we got an interview a little bit later. They caught him in the locker room, and he said everything was fine, he's happy, and there's nothing wrong. Clearly, there's something wrong, and he doesn't want to be there if you're leaving after a comeback win. That this isn't just speculation. This is just showing a lot of body language on his part, and clearly he is not telling the truth because it makes no sense for you to leave and just say, oh yeah, everything was completely fine. You've let the team down, you've let Billy Donovan down, and you've let the front office down in that situation, and that definitely should not go unpunished. So I hope something is put into place because it's not nice to see when it happens to other teams when stars are getting away with anything just because they're stars, quote unquote, of course. The next thing that I saw was Shams actually was talking to some former NBA players, Chandler Parsons and Lou Williams, along with a co-host he had. I forget which female co-host he had at the time, but if you want to look at that video, by all means. And he said that the Kings are expected to be very aggressive leading up to February's trade deadline to potentially add a all-star level player. They're going to be involved in every star player, Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, and maybe Zach LaVine. So interesting to talk there that LaVine was brought up going to the Kings once again. That was one of his preferred destinations, so it's interesting to see that they are talking about potentially adding him if he is available. They're hungry to make a push in the playoffs as they had the best offense in the league last year and didn't capitalize by beating the Warriors in the first round. Obviously, very difficult beating the Warriors in the playoffs, but if they were such a great team offensively last year, it was a historic season offensively, and not being a team in the first round, it's time for them to make a move there. But this trade, if they were potentially going to acquire Pascal Siakam or OG Anunoby, that could really change things of if LaVine was to go to the Raptors or not. It could raise the odds of him going there if they were to lose a star, or it could also lower them because they might not have the pieces to move, depending on what they would be moving to the Sacramento Kings. And could that potentially turn into a 3-team trade? I'm not sure, but there's definitely a high possibility of that when all three sides have been talking amongst each other recently. So it will be very fun come trade deadline if that is a move to be made, and you'll be catching all that here on Bulls Digest, of course. The next thing we want to talk about today is the issues of moving on from Zach LaVine. So what is the problem with moving on from him? What does it have to do with? He obviously has some trade value. He's a former 2-time All-Star, and although his defense isn't that great, and he doesn't pass the ball quite enough, you think another team would be willing to work with him where he's such a great scorer and maybe develop a few of those other things. We don't know what the Bulls are doing to develop him at the current moment, as there hasn't been a whole lot of, stern kind of gestures towards players of you need to do this, you need to do that over the past 6 or 7 seasons since LaVine has been there. And we don't really know what development has been made because not a lot of players have even come up with the Bulls right now, and we don't have any prospects that we've drafted a lot apart from Io, of course, that have stayed and really developed in anything in Chicago. Not that Io is that tremendously good, but he is probably a little better than Patrick Williams at this current moment, even though Patrick Williams was better over the past 2 seasons. Io currently is playing better than Pat Will, who has struggled so much to start the year. So the reason that I read in the article by NBC Sports actually is Zach LaVine wants out of Chicago, as we've talked about, and the Bulls are finally open to the idea. And while there is interest in the 2-time All-Star, other teams are hesitant because of his massive contract. So it is true, the Bulls did give him a very large contract. It was thought to be an overpayment at the time, and it is still thought to be an overpayment, I would have to agree, in the long run. You are getting a lot of points out of Zach LaVine. He's an all-star level player, but he's not playing any defense, and he's not moving the ball. So those are 2 things that you would look for a guy in that sort of a contract, and he isn't simply delivering those things, on the basketball court right now, so it leaves some questions on the table. Next thing I saw in the article that really piqued my interest. I think we have a really good idea as to why that was an issue with Patrick Williams and not coming to a contract with the Bulls. It definitely had to do with the fact that he is apparently seeking triple digits, and he hasn't performed up to those standards at all. It's interesting to see that teams do want his services after how he has played. I guess they're looking at the past couple of seasons and not this year, and basically taking this year as a write-off. But interesting to see that those are the reasons why teams are interested in him. And obviously Caruso makes sense with his contract being so low over a Zach LaVine. So really interesting to see that there for sure. Next thing I saw in the article was Stein somewhat downplays the interest in DeMar DeRozan, although NBC Sports has heard that specific teams, playoff teams, would have interest if he is made available. That said, part of the attraction is the 34-year-old is on an expiring contract and can contribute now, but is not a long-term commitment. The bids for him as a rental would be lowball, but the Bulls would hear from teams. So, we've talked about how DeMar DeRozan hasn't wanted to leave the Bulls because he's not the type of person that wants to push his way out from an organization, regardless of how they're playing. But if they were to make a move, he would be okay with it at the same time. He doesn't want to be the bad guy here, but if the team was to make a trade and get something better, or just better in the long run necessarily, then that would be the move that he might be okay with, and that's another direction to go for sure. There's lots of news that is developing as a Bulls rebuild seems to be right around the corner, and we're going to be keeping you up to date every day. This has been your host, Joey Mercer. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to go down below and like and comment on the video. And until next time, this has been Bulls Digest. Signing off.